Whether you agree with this story or not, I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments because this one tends to spark real conversations. This is the story of a dating coach who built her career telling women to ghost high-value men as an act of empowerment until she found herself completely alone and wondering if the advice she gave others had destroyed her own chance at happiness. Here's what happened. Be me, 34. Name is Serafina, and I used to be one of the most followed dating coaches on social media, with hundreds of thousands of followers hanging on every piece of advice I gave about relationships, empowerment, and taking control of your romantic destiny. This story is the hardest one I've ever had to tell because it's about how I let an ideology I genuinely believed in lead me to choices that cost me relationships, friendships, and years of my life that I can never get back. What I learned through losing almost everything taught me the difference between real self-respect and the kind of self-sabotage that disguises itself as strength. Let me take you back to how this all started because understanding where the philosophy came from helps explain how I became so convinced that I was helping women when I was actually teaching them to hurt themselves. I got into dating coaching in my late 20s after going through a painful breakup with a man who had genuinely mistreated me, manipulating my emotions and making me feel like I was never good enough no matter what I did. That experience left me angry, hurt, and determined to make sure no woman ever felt as powerless as I had felt during those years when I had given everything to someone who gave me nothing in return. My early content was actually healthy and helpful, focused on recognizing red flags, building self-esteem, and understanding that you deserve to be treated with respect in any relationship you choose to be part of. Women responded to that message because it resonated with their own experiences of feeling undervalued or taken for granted by partners who didn't appreciate what they brought to the relationship. I was genuinely helping people during those early years, and the growth of my platform felt like validation that I was doing something meaningful with the pain I had experienced. The shift happened gradually, so gradually that I didn't even notice it was happening until I was deep into territory that I would eventually come to regret more than almost anything in my life. As my platform grew and competition increased, I found that the content that performed best wasn't the balanced, healthy advice about mutual respect and communication. It was the more extreme content about power dynamics and taking control. The posts that went viral were the ones where I talked about men as adversaries to be managed rather than partners to be valued, where I framed relationships as power struggles that women needed to win. I started developing what I called strategic abandonment, a philosophy that encouraged women to ghost high-value men as a way of reclaiming their power and demonstrating that they didn't need anyone to feel complete. The idea was that by walking away without explanation, you showed that you valued yourself more than the relationship, that no man was important enough to deserve closure or communication from you. I positioned this as liberation, as breaking free from the traditional expectation that women should be accommodating, communicative, and emotionally available even when it cost them their dignity. The content exploded because it tapped into something real, the frustration that many women felt about giving too much in relationships and receiving too little in return. But instead of teaching healthy boundaries and self-respect, I was teaching women to treat people as disposable, to see silence as strength, to believe that the ability to walk away without caring was the ultimate form of empowerment. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was taking the pain of my own bad experience and projecting it onto all relationships, teaching women to protect themselves from hurt by never being vulnerable enough to risk it. Donovan was the first man I ghosted using my own philosophy, and losing him is the decision I regret most in my entire romantic history. He was what my content would describe as a high-value man, successful in his career, emotionally intelligent, genuinely kind, and devoted to building a future with me that included all the things I said I wanted. We had been together for 2 years when I started feeling the pressure to practice what I preached, to demonstrate to my followers and to myself that I could walk away from anyone no matter how good the relationship seemed. The truth is that our relationship was healthy and Donovan treated me with nothing but respect and genuine love, but my ideology had convinced me that his consistency was boring, his kindness was weakness, and his desire for commitment was an attempt to control me. I looked for reasons to leave because I had built a career on the idea that leaving was strength, and staying with someone who made me happy felt like a betrayal of everything I stood for professionally. So I ghosted him, blocked him on everything, disappeared from his life without a word of explanation after 2 years of what he probably thought was a loving, committed relationship. The dopamine hit of walking away was real, that immediate sense of power and control that comes from knowing you've completely destabilized someone who thought they knew where they stood with you. I posted about it without naming him, framing it as another act of liberation, another woman choosing herself over the expectation that she should stay and communicate and work things out. My followers celebrated what I had done, congratulating me for having the strength to walk away from someone who had done nothing wrong except make the mistake of being a man in my life. Sterling came next, a successful architect who I dated for about 8 months before implementing the same strategy, disappearing without explanation because that's what my philosophy demanded. Each time I ghosted someone, I told myself the story that I was demonstrating my independence, my self-sufficiency, my refusal to depend on anyone else for my happiness. But looking back, I was really demonstrating my inability to be vulnerable, my fear of genuine connection, and my willingness to hurt good people to maintain an image that wasn't even making me happy. The social evaporation effect started slowly enough that I didn't notice it at first, small changes in how people responded to me that gradually accumulated into something much more significant. Vivian, who had been my best friend for over a decade, started pulling back after watching me ghost Donovan and hearing how I talked about it publicly as a victory rather than a loss. She told me once, gently, that she was worried about the person I was becoming, that the woman she knew used to believe in love and connection even when it was hard. I dismissed her concerns as internalized patriarchy, as her own inability to embrace the radical independence that I had learned to value above everything else. That response, that reflexive dismissal of anyone who questioned my philosophy, was something I did a lot during those years, pushing away anyone who tried to tell me that maybe I was hurting myself along with everyone else. Vivian stayed in my life for another year after that conversation, but the closeness we had shared was never the same, and eventually she drifted away entirely. The irony of my situation became clear to me gradually over the following years as I watched my social circle shrink while my follower count continued to grow. Online, I was a confident, powerful woman who didn't need anyone, dispensing advice to thousands about how to take control of their romantic destinies and refuse to settle for less than they deserved. Offline, I was increasingly isolated, spending more and more nights alone in an apartment that felt emptier every time I came home to it. I told myself that solitude was the price of independence, that the discomfort I felt was just the adjustment period before I reached a higher level of self-actualization where I truly didn't need anyone. But humans are social creatures, and connection isn't a weakness, it's a fundamental need, and no amount of ideology could change the fact that I was lonely in a way that my philosophy couldn't address. The coaching clients who came to me for advice didn't see any of this. They saw the confident persona I presented online and assumed my life behind the camera matched the empowerment I preached. Celeste was a client who followed my advice religiously, implementing strategic abandonment with 3 different men over the course of a year. Each one ghosted without explanation because I had taught her that closure was something you gave yourself, not something you owed anyone else. When she came to me after the 3rd one, crying and confused about why she felt worse instead of better, I didn't have good answers for her because I was struggling with the same question myself. The script I had been reading from for years suddenly seemed hollow when faced with the real human consequence of a woman who had trusted my advice and ended up just as alone as I was. The moment everything crystallized for me was a night about 18 months ago when I saw a photo on social media of Donovan with his new girlfriend Rosalind, looking genuinely happy in a way that I had never allowed myself to be with him. She wasn't more beautiful than me or more accomplished than me, but she was clearly something I hadn't been, present, committed, willing to build something real instead of keeping one foot out the door at all times. I realized looking at that photo that he hadn't been the problem, I had been the problem, and the philosophy I had built my career on had cost me someone who genuinely loved me and wanted to build a life together. The grief that hit me wasn't just about losing Donovan, it was about all the years I had wasted pursuing an ideology that promised empowerment but delivered only isolation. I had followers who admired me, clients who paid me for advice, a platform that gave me influence, but I had no one to share my actual life with because I had systematically removed everyone who tried to get close. The silence of my apartment that night was deafening, and for the first time, I couldn't tell myself it was the sound of independence. It was just the sound of being alone. The process of questioning everything I had taught and believed didn't happen overnight, but it started that night and continued over the following months as I forced myself to honestly evaluate the results of my own philosophy. If ghosting high-value men was empowering, why did I feel powerless every time I came home to an empty apartment and realized no one was coming, no one was waiting, no one even knew or cared where I was? If strategic abandonment was liberation, why did I feel imprisoned by the loneliness that had become the defining feature of my personal life? I started reaching out to the people I had pushed away, not expecting forgiveness, but needing to at least acknowledge that I had been wrong and that they had deserved better than how I treated them. Most didn't respond, which was fair given that I had taught an entire philosophy around not responding, but a few did, including Vivian, who agreed to meet me for coffee after 2 years of minimal contact. That conversation was one of the hardest of my life because I had to admit to someone I loved that I had been the problem, that my ideology had been wrong, and that I had hurt myself and others in the process of promoting it. Vivian was gracious but honest, telling me that she had grieved our friendship years ago and that rebuilding trust would take time, but that she was glad I was finally questioning the beliefs that had seemed so toxic to her from the outside. She said something that has stayed with me ever since, that real strength isn't the ability to walk away from everyone, it's the courage to stay and work through difficult things with people who matter to you. Walking away is easy, she said, staying is hard, and I had confused easy with empowering because easy felt like control. The transformation in my content and philosophy has been gradual because I didn't want to be performative about changing my views, but it has been genuine and complete over the past year. I stopped teaching strategic abandonment and started teaching honest communication, stopped framing relationships as power struggles, and started framing them as partnerships that require vulnerability from both people. I lost followers in the process, lots of them, because the content that had made me famous wasn't the content I could keep creating with a clear conscience. Some of my former followers accused me of selling out or going soft, of betraying the sisterhood by admitting that maybe men weren't all adversaries and maybe ghosting wasn't actually empowering. But I also heard from women who thanked me for changing direction, who said they had followed my earlier advice and ended up in the same lonely place I had been, and who were grateful that someone was finally saying out loud what they had started to realize privately. Those messages made the loss of followers and the criticism from former fans feel worthwhile because at least I wasn't leading people down the same path that had led me to such profound regret. I'm still single today, and I don't know if I'll ever find the kind of relationship I threw away with Donovan, but I'm dating again with a completely different approach than the one I used to teach. I show up honestly, communicate directly, and treat the men I date as potential partners rather than adversaries to be managed or threats to be preemptively abandoned. Sometimes it doesn't work out, and that's okay, but at least when it doesn't work out it's for real reasons, not because I sabotaged it by following a philosophy that was designed to prevent connection. The lesson I want to share from this experience is about the difference between self-respect and self-sabotage, because they can look similar from the outside, but they lead to completely different destinations. Self-respect means knowing your worth and refusing to accept treatment that doesn't honor that worth, but it also means being capable of genuine connection, vulnerability, and commitment when you find someone who deserves those things from you. Self-sabotage disguised as self-respect is what I was teaching, the idea that protecting yourself from potential hurt is more important than opening yourself to potential love. If you're someone who has been following advice about ghosting, strategic abandonment, or treating relationships as power struggles to be won, I want to ask you honestly whether that advice is making you happier or just making you more alone. There's nothing empowering about isolation that you didn't choose. Nothing liberating about watching potential partners walk away because you've made yourself impossible to get close to. Nothing victorious about being right if being right means being alone. The men I ghosted weren't threats. They were people who wanted to love me, and I treated them as obstacles to my empowerment when they could have been partners in building a life. For anyone watching this who has been on the other side of this dynamic, ghosted by someone who convinced themselves they were making a power move, I want you to know that it almost certainly wasn't about you. The person who ghosted you was probably struggling with their own fears, their own pain, their own inability to be vulnerable, and taking that out on you by disappearing rather than having an honest conversation. You deserved better than that, and their choice to leave without explanation says everything about their limitations and nothing about your worth. I can't undo the damage I caused to Donovan, Sterling, and the other men I ghosted, and I can't give back the years I spent isolated in an apartment pursuing an ideology that made me miserable. But I can be honest now about what I learned, and I can hope that my story helps someone else avoid the same mistakes I made before they cost them the same things they cost me. True strength isn't never needing anyone. It's being brave enough to need someone and trust them with your heart even though it might get broken. That's the lesson I wish I had learned before I threw away relationships that could have become the foundation of a happy life, before I pushed away friends who were trying to help me see what I couldn't see myself. Maybe it's not too late for me to build something real with someone, or maybe the consequences of my choices are permanent, but either way I'm grateful to have finally understood what I was doing wrong. Learning the truth late is better than never learning it at all. Thank you for listening to this story, and I genuinely want to know what you think about it, whether you've seen this dynamic play out in your own life or in the lives of people you know. Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I learned something from every conversation, and your perspective might help someone else who's watching and trying to figure out what path to take in their own relationships. Take care of yourselves, choose connection over isolation, and I'll see you in the next one.